like a mighty stream, and let God's peace fill the earth as the waters fill the sea. And let us say amen. So as I begin my commentary for this morning, I want to tell you, even though you probably won't believe me, but I wrote this sermon before the inauguration. I wrote this sermon before President Biden was installed as the President of the United States, before his commentary on unity. And most certainly I wrote this sermon before the immortal words of Amanda Gorton. And to be honest, I pray that over the next few months we'll have the opportunity to study her words, as I believe they will be lasting and impactful. But I want to share with you this morning just a story that Lisa Jo Baker wrote in 2013. And it may feel a little long, but I tell you it's worth it. So Lisa Jo Baker wrote as follows. So someone will inevitably ask you by the end of the day, what did you do today? And you can tell them about the lists checked off and the conference calls and the crock pot you had to run through the dishwasher and still had to wash again out by hand. You can tell them about the chips that were crushed into the carpet and that you had to vacuum up, and the 4 rooms that you swept clean. You can tell them about the trips to the library and the loads of laundry that were washed and folded. You can tell them about breakfasts burned and about the tantrums that were raged in the car rides to school. You can tell them about the text messages and the deadlines ticking ever louder. You can tell them about the last hours of daylight before bath and bed and comatose sleep, and how slowly the clock ticks towards 9 o'clock. You can tell them all of that and it will be true. Or you can tell them, I changed the world today. You can tell them about how you fought back the dark and held back the tide of all the broken and upside down bits and pieces and jagged names that the world will tsunami at our children. You can tell them about the miles you ran in the marathon of raising tiny humans and who can make sense of their emotions, choices, wants, and fears and passions. You can tell them that you stood in the gap, that you shone a light, and that you cheered the loudest. You can tell them that you saved lives and dreams today, that you learned how to listen and cry and open your arms to people, that you bandaged broken hearts and superglued the tender sense of self and hope and purpose back together again, gently, deliberately, with shaking hand and a desperation you can hardly swallow past. You can tell them that you made executive decisions that were questioned and challenged and ridiculed and sometimes accepted with bad grace by others, but that you kept your head and your temper, and you double dog dared any executive to top that kind of drama and guilt and determination, all rolled up into a half-hour chunk of the afternoon. You can tell them that you practiced being brave, like your life depended on it, because it does. You can tell them that you were an artist and a doctor and a psychiatrist and a beautician and a chef and a personal trainer. You can tell them that you were broken today, that you need to find a way to put yourself back together again before tomorrow. You can tell them that you were beloved today, that you need to find a way to remember all this glory that will be starting up again tomorrow, that you learned to sing today. You can tell them that you were brave, weighed down, broken, and brand new all at the same time, And in the same breath, you can tell them that you have bruises, but you wouldn't trade them. Not today, and not for all of the tomorrows. And all that will be the truth also. So many times I have stood here in this spot and preached the message that we'll have to tell our children what we did in a specific moment of our lives. We'll have to answer the question for the next generation. And we will have to stand before our Maker and answer the same question. And we'll have to stand in front of the mirror and answer the same question. Certainly we have watched over the last few weeks politicians answer those questions. But today I ask you. It's no different than when a generation ago, the Jewish community of America was forced to ask itself what it did while Germany rose and the Jewish community was trapped, or what the generation in America of Jews did while Jews were caught behind the Iron Curtain, longing to go to Israel, or the Jews of Ethiopia who had never seen an airplane, what we did to get them on board. So many of our community did so much. They stepped up. I remember Shabbat after Shabbat, Cy Berkman telling me the stories of how he fought the Nazis, what his mother would have thought of him killing Nazis on a Shabbos morning. Or the stories I heard most recently of Saul Singer. May both Saul and Cy's memory be a blessing. But how Saul worked alongside Fran to rescue Jews from the former Soviet Union and from Ethiopia and bring them to the land of Israel. And that's why one sentence in this week's Parsha, as I often say, it struck me so deeply, but this was a gut punch. V'lo yochlu litmameah. They didn't have time to bake bread. And so we have the long-standing custom of matzah on Pesach. Because for whatever reason, the Jewish people in that moment didn't have time to bake bread. After hundreds of years of enslavement, after plague, announcement after announcement, decree after decree, the Hebrews would finally be leaving Egypt after the night of putting blood on their doorposts as an act of defiance against the tyrannical regime of Pharaoh. It still seemed as though our ancestors were caught by surprise, that their exodus was now upon them. After Moses explains to our people in just a few verses earlier to prepare, they're still caught off guard. It seems inconceivable to me that our ancestors would have to rush in those final moments of their enslavement. You would have thought they would have had their bags packed, that their food would have been prepared for the journey. They were leaving Egypt forever, and yet they had not even packed a lunch or a snack. My grandmother wouldn't even leave the house to go do some errands without a banana in her purse. And because of that moment, we are consigned to cleaning our homes of every leaven, and we're forced to eat matzah on Pesach. That's why it's so hard for me to understand what the Gan Na'ul, Rabbi Naftali Hertz Wesley, says when he says, B'nai Yisrael yatzu miMitzrayim b'simcha u'v'tov leiv, that the Jewish people left Egypt joyful with an uplifted heart. Ki aminu b'Adonai u'v'Moshe avdo, because they believed in Moses, God's servant, and in God. It's hard for me to imagine they truly believed it was ever going to happen, that their freedom would come. It's difficult for me to believe that they believed in God and Moses, because they didn't do anything that indicated they were actually ever going to leave. And then Rabbi Naftali Hertz Wesley points out, as he pivots just a little bit, he says, V'chalila lachsho shayu rotzim litakev od begalutam biratzon b'li siba. God forbid they wanted to stay in Egypt. God forbid they wanted to put off their exodus without a reason. Rather, he says, don't read the text as they were unprepared. Rather, read the text as they seized the moment. Don't say they weren't ready to leave. Say they saw their opening and they took it and they acted. The process of redemption requires a psychological transition as well as a physical one. They had done the psychological work. They had put the blood on the doorposts. They borrowed their neighbor's gold and silver. And soon as they were literally saw a streak of daylight, they left. They weren't procrastinating. They were waiting for the right moment. The question and the challenge our ancestors posed is, will you act when the moment presents itself? The blood on the doorpost had nothing to do with an angel of death. It had to do with participating in our own redemption. Rambam, Maimonides, teaches Be'am Rav Ata Heref Yadecha. With the might of a nation, you will deal by your hand. We are a powerful people with extraordinary talents and abilities, but we must be ready to stand as individuals. You cannot say someone else will take care of it. Someone else will step up. Someone else is better suited. As it teaches in the book of Joshua, after an extraordinarily great and victorious battle, the people built a monument to their triumph, and the text reads, Vayomer el bnei Yisrael lemor, say to the children of Israel the following, Asher yisha'alu b'nechem, when your children ask machar, tomorrow, et avotam lemor ma'avanim ha'elu, you'll better have an answer for them as to what you did in that moment. In the time to come, when your children ask, you'll have to have an answer. You will be able to answer them that there were wars to fight and you fought them. There was a nation that needed to be built and we built it. In this fractious moment in history of our great nation here in America, when our children ask, what did you do to heal the division? You better have an answer. In this moment of massive death and immeasurable suffering caused by a pandemic, and our children ask, what did you do to alleviate the pain of others? You better have an answer. In this time of incomprehensible international refugee crisis, and our children ask, what did you do to clothe the naked and shelter the homeless? You better have an answer. In this time of incalculable emotional anxiety, what did you do to make somebody else feel safe? You better have an answer. As Lisa Joe Baker said, you can tell them you practiced being brave like your life depended on it, because it did. You can tell them that you were broken today, that you need to find a way to put yourself back together again before tomorrow. You can tell them that you were beloved today, that you need to find a way to remember that all this glory will be starting up again tomorrow. That you learned to sing today. You'll tell them that you were brave, weighed down, broken, and brand new, all in the same breath. President Biden, in his inaugural address this week, said, I believe we must. I'm sure you do as well. I believe we will. And when we do, we'll write the next chapter in the history of the United States of America, the American story. A story that might sound something like a song that means a lot to me. It's called American Anthem. And there's one verse that stands out, at least one for me, he said, and it goes like this. The work and prayers of a century have brought us to this day. What shall be our legacy? What will our children say? And I add and conclude, when your children ask what you did in this moment, I pray you have an answer. I'm still working on mine. Shabbat Shalom. We continue with Ein Keloheinu, which I believe is on page 204.